So the ayes are 67, the noes are 56. The question is agreed to. I will report this bill with amendment presently. Now we've got the next bill. Got a bit of paper there. Members, we now move to the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service Amendment Bill, and the question is that Part 1 stand part. David Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to take a call on Part 1 of the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service Amendment Bill. Mr. Chairman, there have already been points made in earlier parts of the debate about how it was unfortunate that the bill was the submissions on the bill at Select Committee were heard in secret, and I think the unnecessary nature of that secrecy is emphasised by the number of people who are in the gallery today. The number of people present in the gallery today sort of indicates that the government need not have been too worried about hearing the original submissions on the bill at Select Committee in public. I don't think they would have been overrun by unruly behaviour, and they would have, in fact, had a transparent process which would have given some of the critics of the legislation some confidence that there wasn't something untoward going down through this bill. Mr. Chairman, I want to focus and ask the question of the Minister to address Clause 5A of the bill. It's a matter that I referred to in my contribution on the first reading of the bill, the drafting relating to clause inserted by 5A, which is 4AAA subsection 2. Now, subsection 1 was inserted into the bill at the recommendation of the Select Committee upon the submissions of, amongst other things, the Human Rights Authority, whatever the proper name is, the Commission, the Human Rights Commission. Thank you, Mr. Robertson. It makes it clear that in performing its functions under the Act, the Security Intelligence Service contributes to keeping New Zealand society secure, independent, free and democratic. Then in B, contributes to the participation of New Zealand in the maintenance of international security. And then C, and this is more relevant to the question that I'm coming to, acts in accordance with New Zealand law and all human rights standards recognised by New Zealand law, except to the extent that they are in relation to national security modified by an enactment, and acts in the discharge of its operational functions independently and impartially, and 3, with integrity and professionalism, and 4, in a manner that facilitates effective democratic oversight. And I think that's a wise addition to set out some principles that underlie the performance of the Security Intelligence Service. But I just wonder if the wording of subsection 2 is so broad as to render nugatory the section that I've just read out, the subsection that I've just read out. Because subsection 2 goes on and says, subsection 1 does not impose particular duties on or give particular powers to the Security Intelligence Service, the Director, any employee of the service or the Minister. And so my question for the Minister and again the officials that we seem to have in the House in support of the Minister seem rather secret at the moment as well. I can't see them, no. Well, there's obviously secret service powers being here to, I don't know, this must be some device that's come from either chaos or the other side. The cone of silence doesn't seem to be working today, but the invisibility cloak is. It rests then upon the Minister to address this issue himself, which is to explain how subsection 1, when read, doesn't render. Subsection 2, when read, doesn't make a complete nonsense of the very fine sentiments expressed in subsection 1. So Mr. Chairman, I do ask the Chairman to explain how, if this subsection 1 doesn't impose any particular duties or give particular powers, and I'm not so worried about the powers, I'm worried about doesn't impose particular duties on the Security Intelligence Service, the director or employee or the service or the minister, what that means. Now, if it means that there are some general duties or some general obligation to comply with these laws that are referred to, that acts in accordance with New Zealand, Mr. Chairman.
I will give the member another call, but I have to deal with the matter. During the course of the questions on clauses 1 to 3, the result was incorrectly announced at 67-56. It should have read 65-55. I informed the House, and the record will show the amended numbers. Honourable David Parker.
Thank you for that correction, Mr. Chairman. So I understand that there might not be any standard over and above what's set out in those laws that has to be recognised or complied with by the Security Intelligence Service when it performs its functions under this Act. But I don't think you need subsection 2 to say that. That would be the law anyway. All that subsection 1 says is that unless there's some modification in relation to national security by some other enactment, then those other enactments apply anyway. So I don't understand why you need subsection 2 in respect of that, and therefore I'm confused by what it means. Does it mean that there are no duties that arise under that Act? I thought that's one way that you might read it. I actually find it a surprising and confusing subclause that I think makes this legislation harder to interpret rather than easier. And I would suggest to the Minister that he seek advice from officials as to whether, in fact, we're making things worse by that rather than better. If there are particular duties that arise under those statutes, well, they're not abrogated anyway. Well, I presume that they're not intended to be abrogated by subclause 2. And I'm just left confused as to what that clause means, and don't think that it adds anything to the meaning of the statute, but rather confuses things. So, Mr. Chairman, if you could, Mr. Chairman, I would be grateful if the Minister could address that issue when he has a chance to consider it. It may well be that officials under their invisibility cloaks considering this in some other part of the precinct, and that maybe they need to come back to him during the send a pigeon, says Mr. No, that's I don't think we have many pigeons left in the Security Intelligence Service. What was that? Mr. Finlayson keeps pigeons. Well, look, no, I'm sure he has a cloth cat, but I don't know that he keeps pigeons. So, but it is a serious issue. I agree that we should insert those principles, but I don't understand what subclause 2 does. If it doesn't impose particular duties, does that imply that subclause 1 implies general duties? Because if it applies general duties rather than particular duties, what are they? I don't know. And again, I just think, to the Minister, if it doesn't apply particular duties, does it impose general duties? And if those are general duties, what are they? Again, that seems to me to be undesirable. I would have thought what we want is we just have the obligation for them to act in accordance with New Zealand law, to the extent that they are modified by another enactment. That's all it should say, because otherwise we're left with an uncertainty as to what particular duties under those acts do or do not apply, and even if that's not a proper concern, are there general duties that arise from these preceding clauses that are broader than statutory duties that arise under the New Zealand laws to which subclause 1C 1 in Roman numerals refers to, Mr. Speaker. So we in general in the Labour Party, we are convinced that the other changes that are made to clause by Part 1 to the powers of the Security Intelligence Service are necessary. It was pointed out to the Select Committee that there are various powers that are held by other arms of the state, like the police, relating to newer technologies that have been developed since the original Act was passed some 40 years ago, the 1969 Act, and that technological advances since that date need to be properly regulated. Indeed, if it's a bit like the police, there would have been some powers of the Security Intelligence Service that would have been unregulated because they weren't included in the Act, and therefore they weren't prohibited to be used, which through this piece of legislation will now be regulated. And I think that regulation is appropriate. I'm sure that other members on behalf of the Labour Party will have some other questions relating to the wording of that, and I wouldn't mind clarifying myself.